I think the smaller the groups, the quicker decision making. And I think you're starting to see a lot of that happen now and be formalized into tech.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of NEWFORUM. And we're always honored to bring you awesome guests, inspiring founders, and visionaries on our podcast. And on today's episode, I'm with Brandon Nolte, who's the podcast host of Bounty Hunter podcast, and he's also part of the Bankless DAO and writes about Web3 and DAOs. And I'm super happy to talk with him about DAOs today. Hi, Brandon.
Hi, Joy. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's super cool. I never interviewed a podcast host, so I'm excited to know what has been your journey into the whole Web3 space and you founding your podcast and into DAOs. So what is your beginning steps there?
Yeah, so I've been an entrepreneur probably for about 10 years now, and I'm currently the host of a podcast called Bounty Hunter, which helps people understand what it's like to work in Web3. So whether you're a founder of a product or service and you're looking to understand the tools or the ecosystem, or you're simply someone who wants to contribute to this new ecosystem, that's kind of what I'm trying to help illuminate. And I launched Bounty Hunter back in April when I received a grant from Bankless DAO to fund the cost of the show. And since then, we've released about 27 episodes, and we've got a bunch of great guests on there from DAO tools to communities. Prior to that, though, I bootstrapped a company called Healthy Hemp Oil, where we used blogging to help educate people on the power of CBD. And we ended up selling over $12 million worth of products in our 8-year run. And it was a really great experience. I learned a lot about helping educate people in a space that's really kind of confusing, like cannabis. And honestly, that's really what kind of attracts me to the DAO space, is that I think it's something that has a lot of potential, but there's a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings and ways you can get tripped up when you're trying to understand it. So I think it's right for people to get great content like, the podcast that you're doing and all the other great content out there in the space.
Yeah, what a shift. I think that's so interesting that you went from that to Web3, and it just shows that you're really into what drives society or what is really changing the game. I think that's really interesting. And so what is something that you've learned from being a podcaster yourself, interviewing all these people, and what has been the most exciting thing for you?
What really drives me is I love to kind of learn where the future is going, what's happening, where things are. That's probably a pro and con of mine. It's harder for me to live in the present, but I get excited about these potential futures. And anybody who's played around in the Web3 space, there's just a lot of really exciting ideas that they have so much potential, but we're still building them. So some of my learnings, I guess, around Web3 has really been around the power of decentralization, what it is, and how it can be used for business. So as a startup founder, I had a pretty typical, hierarchy. It was me as the CEO, and we had, other managers, and we had supporting staff and everything. And, things worked great. But honestly, a lot of times I was kind of the bottleneck for decision making. That was something that I felt a lot where, sometimes we were doing great. And when we were doing great, that was awesome. But other times, we crashed. And that was also kind of on my shoulders as well. So I think part of what excites me about the Web3 work is that this aspect of decentralization is coming to the forefront. So how can we make decisions together collectively in a way that is better for everybody involved? And that's something that I've really learned a lot from some of my guests is, how do you take a vision as an entrepreneur and actually help share and pull people up, not just giving them, kind of table scraps, 1 or 2% here, part of the equity, but how do you actually bring them forward and pull everybody up? So one example that comes to mind for that is Adam Jackson with Brain Trust. And he's such a storied entrepreneur. He's sold multiple businesses, some to I think Intuit and LinkedIn, a couple of really big companies. and he decided to get into a marketplace for Web3. It's called Brain Trust, and Brain Trust is a talent network that's owned and operated by the users. And if anybody's listening out there hasn't checked that out yet, you should definitely check it out. They've already landed clients like Nike and Porsche. And when I asked Adam about, what it was like to kind of give up control as an entrepreneur or someone who's used to having that control, he was like, it's great. Honestly, it's the best thing. And, I think that's probably not your typical answer, but he's really embodied this idea of empowering the community to come up with proposals, to take things from 0 to 1 and to execute on them. So he's no longer the bottleneck. He might never have been like I was, but that's the kind of thing where you can point to something like Brain Trust and be like, this is a new type of organization. Like we haven't seen companies like this come in and partner with Fortune 500 companies like Brain Trust is doing. And it's those kind of companies and organizations that make me go, wow, there's a lot going on with this space.
Wow, I loved your insight on like the side of the CEO, the side of the entrepreneur that nobody's really talking about. You always see on podcasts like, wow, like the CEO is doing that, and they get glorified. But then
Yeah.
when I hear like about the struggles and I don't want to wake up and be responsible for everybody's problem, and I can't imagine how that feels. And I feel like that's where DAOs can step in, and it's more like, okay, we have 5, 6 people who are really passionate about this and who really also want to lead, and who want to work together with the CEO. Because before reading about entrepreneurs, I was always like, oh my god, like these people are like gods, like they're running these like multi-billion, multi-million companies, or I looked up to them, but I realized there's so much sacrifice, and they're also human, and I think DAOs can maybe put this pressure not on the top management, but can decentralize, like you said, and I'm wondering, like right now, like from observing different DAOs and projects, like what is the current state of the DAO right now? I think we've been in the year of the DAO, and before that the NFT. So what is the current state of the DAOs, and where do you see are the biggest struggles right now?
I think we're in the experimentation phase. So DAOs are a new technology, a new tool that has evolved alongside a blockchain, and probably through all the blockchain technology, DAOs have emerged. And right now we're just trying to figure things out. What that means is that right now there's still not a lot of like, you don't see big companies on the Fortune 500 list that are DAOs right now. But eventually, I think we will start to see that when DAOs start to take mainstream. So we're still trying to figure out all of these different aspects, how much governance is needed, how far do we push the decentralization down towards the people who are working on the ground floor? How much innovation can we have? Do we want to do grants in our DAO, or do we want to have a self-sustaining business model? These are all questions that even Bankless DAO is trying to figure out right now. And I think they're a really great example of this period in time in DAOs because they're so big. Bankless DAO is such a huge attractor of talent. And when I got there in December 2021, I jumped on a community call my first day. It was a Friday. And I think there was maybe 200 people on this call. And I was like, what is happening? There's like 200 random people, different names. Nobody has profile pictures with their actual face on it. It's like animals and, animated things. And for someone who is coming from the typical Web2 world, this is like, it's so chaotic. But I listened to basically pitches from 40 different projects that were happening in the space. And then I happened to hear one about this project called the Podcast Hatchery, which is where I eventually ended up joining. So the idea was, we want to help people who are content creators create more content and to support them. So we have people who are good with editing, people who are better with promotion, and people who know more about Web3. So, when I was kind of comparing myself as a typical startup founder, like, should I go about this on my own? It was kind of a no-brainer. Like, I want to join the hatchery, learn from people, and try to add value in the way that I can by creating content and education. And so this kind of thing, this hatchery wasn't part of the initial design of Bankless DAO, but it came out of the inspiration of some people who were into podcasting and into the audio video guild. And It's just a good example that some of these things that DAOs are doing, you just can't predict. And when you push the decentralization powers down to people on the ground floor, you give them power to make really great decisions to create projects that can be very inspiring to a lot of people. It inspired me to join and to add value. And I think to kind of recircle back on your question, there's a lot of experimentation happening, there's a lot of innovation happening, and this is a double-edged sword because there's a lot of challenges that come with it. But we're still trying to like have a battle of the ideas and figure out what is working, what's not working.
Yeah, I love that insight because I feel like sometimes my own experience with DAOs, I'm always wondering what are other people, how do they feel when they enter these discords or when they enter these community calls? I'm always like curious, like what is the experience like? And I read somewhere like if you want to make a decision, make a DAO because they move faster. And I want to have your commentary on that with decision making. Do you think like it gets like the decision making gets done really fast, or do you think there's still some areas where it's like, okay, for example, me, I tried to engage in a DAO one time and I didn't really feel like my voice was heard. And then there's other times where I joined a group and it was only 5-6 people and I could really engage myself. So I'm wondering scalability and like how do we handle that in the DAO?
Yeah, decision making is a really big challenge to figure out, and it depends on how big the group is. I think if you compare, like in the United States, for example, we have two big major political parties. I'm not super big into politics, but the example stands. If you're trying to make a decision between two different things, and there's everybody in the United States making a decision, then there's just a lot of chance for people to disagree and to go into different, like half the people aren't going to be happy. People are typically very dissatisfied with this current system, I think, on the whole. And so if you look on the complete opposite side, on the micro side of things, if Joy, you and I were in a podcast together and we were in our own little pod or our own little working group, you and I could make decisions like that. So you would say, hey, Brandon, I think there's a great idea. We want to go in this direction. We want to interview these people. And I would say, okay, here's some feedback. Here's what I think. Like maybe we tweak it like this and let's go. So I think the smaller the groups, the quicker decision making. And I think you're starting to see a lot of that happen now and be formalized into tech. There's a product that's now called Metropolis. It used to be called Orca. That's a huge proponent of pods, which is basically just small working groups, right? So what's the atomic working group of a company? It's really these teams, right? It's the teams that can move quickly and make decisions autonomously and with power, but they have to be given that power to make the decisions. And I think that's what DAOs enable, is they can push that decision making down. So for example, with the hatchery, they got funding from the grants committee within Bankless DAO. And then what they do with that money is up to them. Now, the hatchery did have to come up with a proposal. They said, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take on 3 different podcasts this season. Here's our KPIs. So there is a level of accountability, but the grants committee isn't like knocking on their door every 2 or 3 days and being like, hey, how's it going? Like, maybe you should do it this way. There's this kind of implicit trust that like they know what they're doing and they should just go and do it.
Okay, so here's a controversial thought. I had an investor on the other day on a podcast, and a Web3 investor, and we were talking about DAOs, and he was like, this is way too chaotic for me to invest in, or this is like, he was basically saying like DAOs, I keep my hands off it. And I'm wondering, how do you think like DAOs should self-sustain their operations, or how do you think like Web3 investors and the more techie side of things can get engaged with that? Because he was saying like he doesn't think it's a sustainable long-term model. But I want to know your thoughts on companies basically getting involved into DAOs.
Yeah, I think there's this kind of debate between either public goods or more traditional business run DAOs, so like more revenue focused entities. And the end result will probably be something more of a blend, something more of like a public benefit corporation where, yes, we care about financially being sustainable, but also we care about the environment, we care about the impact on our employees, et cetera. Like, I think there's a place where we don't just care about the finances. That said, I think right now there are a lot of DAOs where there's no business plan. There's no business plan. They created a token, they're giving it out, and some people don't even care because they're getting a token, they're excited, and they're just trying to experiment. So with Bankless DAO, I had an interesting conversation with someone on the grants committee. His name is Lynx, and he's a great guy. I had him on the podcast as well. And he was telling me that, his kind of perspective was like, well, if Bankless DAO gives out all the funds to these various projects and seeds kind of the inspiration to what will be future businesses of Web3, then perhaps, this is my metaphor, but perhaps like a tree kind of, giving off the acorns to grow into other trees, like it's kind of doing its job in a sense. And for me, coming from a business world, that's hard for me to grasp, because I personally think that projects should be sustainable on their own right. But I think there can be a case to be made about having that be your intention as long as you're clear about it. And then obviously, if you're an investor, you may want to stay away from those kinds of projects, but maybe not. Maybe that's what you care about too, and that resonates with you as well.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe they have to shift their mindset, and DAOs have to also think about what, like there has to be more of like a merge kind of in the future of both sides stepping together towards each other to meet halfway, I think. And
Totally.
yeah, and Brandon, from your perspective, like what is for you a good DAO onboarding? What does it look like? I know you tweeted about that, but I want to know like what is a good DAO onboarding and what is kind of like what should they stay away from?
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes you write tweets and you think nothing of them, and then they do way better than you think. That was one of them where it really struck a chord with people out there in the space. And I think that's because onboarding is the first step into DAOs, and everyone has something to say about it. Everyone has joined, at least if you're in the space, you've gone there and you've had interactions with DAOs that have either like just been flat or haven't worked, and you've jumped ship. And I've had my fair share as well. So I think sometimes people are afraid to do things that are kind of manual and use people as onboarding. But I do think, bottom line, that is kind of like the best case scenario. When you have people coming on board, I think best practice usually is to have you can either come in cohorts, so you can bring in groups like Cabin does and have an intro call, and then you have kind of like your group. So you come in, it's like going to school. You have your class, and so your friends, and you're all in it together. You all started the same day of school. It's kind of like that same feeling that we've had before, and it just brings a sense of camaraderie and a sense of belonging. Because what you want to do with DAO onboarding is you want to get people to make friends. Period. Like they might come for the vibe, but they stay for the friends. If you don't make friends and you don't have fun while you're at the DAO, you're not going to stay. So I think the miss here is trying to automate everything and just having a wiki and just assuming that people are going to be proactive and like just start reading your wiki and doing work and submitting it right away. That's probably not going to happen 90% of the time.
I love the high school reference. Like you leave school, but do these structures, do they really change? I don't really know.
Right, right.
So in the end, it's all about, you think, like the community and the people you kind of meet in the DAO and how you kind of feel with the group dynamics, I feel like, and that makes you either want to stay or not. So you've been into the CBD industry, and I'm wondering your thoughts on social change with DAOs. I read a couple of times in a DAO where people were like, okay, we can do this project, NFT project or whatever together, and we can do something like in the greater good. So we can do something and contribute to another project that might be like a social project that they felt really, really passionate about. So what do you think is like the potential for DAOs to solve kind of like deeper issues, like deeper social issues? I know there's been DAOs like the Ukraine DAO who raised a lot of money, and I'm wondering from your perspective, like how can that help humans to coordinate and to solve these kind of issues?
I'll preface this by saying that I'm not super deep into this side of the Web3 space, but yeah, you can see some really great examples there in Climate DAO and Ukraine DAO, where people are passionate about helping, supporting others, and I think the internet has given us a lot of great crowdfunding tools, period. So what's better in Web3 than what we could do with Kickstarter or GoFundMe is really the question. And to me, maybe the biggest difference is that you know where the money is going to, or at least you hope you know, as long as you know who's holding the wallet on the other end. And there's less money going to the platform. So the blockchain kind of cuts out that middleman, the Kickstarter, the GoFundMe, who's taking a percentage of that. So you can add more value into the ecosystem that way, which is a net positive. But just like these tools are helping with regular, for-profit organizations to help everyone in the organization feel empowered and excited about things, I think the same thing is true with nonprofits as well, and for passion businesses. So kind of a bland answer maybe, but I think the same thing that's happening elsewhere is going to also happen in that space as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like there's a difference though, because for me it's like when I used to look up social causes, it's really like official, like there's a organization, you have to there's so many middlemen, or you feel like, okay, this is really official and I don't really know the people behind this thing, necessarily. So maybe if I have a DAO, or if I'm part of a DAO and I really know these people, and I know like, okay, like this person is actually where the money is needed, or so I think the level of like trust is maybe can be higher, but also like there's always ups and downs, and there's always things that can go wrong, especially with wallets. And I don't want to tell that it's all good, but for me at least, when I started reading about like social causes and stuff, it was always kind of like a forefront, and I really like that in DAOs you can work on your projects and you can say, hey, like we are here, we both are passionate about this thing, and let's do something about it. Like we are here, like we have people who live in that area, or we have people who are living on the other side of the world who face the same problem. Let's do something right now, or let's come up with a fund or something. I feel like that's something I haven't seen before. I'm excited about. But
those are great examples actually, and you're pointing out a couple things. One is the accessibility, right? So sometimes nonprofits seem like a little bigger. They put on a little bigger than they are, and that can be kind of off-putting, right? You can't really feel like you want to be involved if it's too hard to reach. It's this big organization. Like you said, you want to feel like you know who you're working with and that you're able to do work together. I think that's a really powerful thing, and DAOs offer a lot of transparency, not just with who you're working with, but where the money is flowing. So having a fully open and transparent treasury is probably pretty new. I don't know how many people in a normal nonprofit have access to the bank accounts and know exactly where the money's flowing, but it's probably mostly just the accountants and like the CEO and top management.
And you can have skin in the game. I like that, you can have people coming together and they have all skin in the game. And it's like, if we don't see where the funds is going, or if we fail at this project or whatever is happening, it's on us. It's our pull together capital. And I really like that about the DAO structure. Brandon, I loved having you on. Like, I want to know, like, where can our audience find your podcast, and also where can we find you on social media? And I'm sure there's going to be another episode, or we're going to get you back on, because I really think you're super valuable in the space. And yeah, thank you for hopping on today.
Yeah, thanks for the compliments. It's been my pleasure. I think you do a great service here, sharing all this education with people, and just glad to be here. So thanks for having me. People can go find me on Twitter at Brandon C, as in Christopher, Nolte, and you can find out the show at bountyhuntershow.com and check out some episodes if you want to learn more.
Definitely go on the website, check out the episode. It's really great knowledge. And yeah, thank you guys for joining today's podcast. And if you want to get more involved within our community, make sure to get on our Twitter, get involved, and also in our Discord. I'm going to link all of the things down below. Thank you, Brandon. And I see you guys in the next episode of NEWFORUM.